Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening for our webinar, Saving and Spending Techniques to Start Your Year Off Right. My name is Kelly Blount, and I'm the Program Marketing Specialist here at General Electric Credit Union. We're so glad you've joined us as we have a lot of great content ahead and wanted to thank you all for tuning in from the comfort of wherever you may be tonight. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Todd Moore with Trinity Debt Management to introduce himself and take us through today's topic.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Todd Moore from Trinity Debt Management. Great to be with everyone this evening. First, let me say Happy New Year. This is the time when we begin to make resolutions for the coming year. We begin to think about our financial plans. And tonight, I'm going to introduce to you some ways that we can think about changing how we approach money. Particularly, we're going to be looking at some psychological theories that explain our spending patterns, particularly overspending. And the goal is to identify some of the fallacies that we often make, which leads to irrational spending choices, to help us really curb our spending, free up some additional money for saving and investing in this coming year. So that's the agenda for this evening. Now, I'll draw your attention just to the definition on the slide here. Overspending can be defined as spending beyond one's means, possibly due to a sudden event, job loss, or a slow evolution of financial behavior. And the Federal Reserve, I put this statistic in here for everyone, just to kind of put this in context, get us thinking about the topic this evening. So when the Federal Reserve report came out, 1/4 of adults surveyed had one or more bills that were unable to be paid in full that month. And this was really looking at somewhere around $400 financial setback. So certainly we want to make certain that we're building some new strategies in this coming year. And again, bring up some additional dollars so we can reach those larger financial goals. Okay. All right. Kelly, I was having an issue here with moving through my slide.
If you just click on the presentation, Todd, it should pop those arrows up. Yep, there you go.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Kelly. Okay, so let's get into some of the psychological aspects. I find this, I'm hoping that others will find this really interesting. I thought I'd present to you, I did some research here recently and have become quite interested in this topic. Oftentimes we'll talk during our presentations about how behavior shapes what we do financially. And I've spent some time kind of reviewing some of the literature, wanted to share a few of these theories with you. And the idea here is if we can identify some of the psychological reasons why we may be overspending, then we can also curb that behavior. We can change that behavior. And, you know, really the key to doing any good financial work is being able to identify some of those fallacies that we make, and then have some strategy in place to change that behavior so we reach our larger financial goals. So I wanted to present some of these strategies to you, some of these theories to you, you know, focused on this notion of why we might be overspending. And I think it'll lay a good context for how we approach budgeting in the coming year and how we look at different debt management strategies. You'll be able to go back, you know, after the presentation, kind of review some of these strategies. Maybe some of these are affecting some of the financial choices that you're making now. So the first one I wanted to get into tonight is this concept of delayed reward discounting. So I'm going to read this definition to you, and then we're gonna kind of pull this apart. So basically what we're talking about with this particular term, it's the preference for smaller, more immediate rewards as opposed to larger yet delayed rewards. So when we think about this, oftentimes we want that immediate thing, and that can be overwhelming at certain points. You know, sometimes we may have impulsive spending. Sometimes we would see something that will require us to have a longer term savings plan in place, but it's the inability to reach that larger financial goal. The idea here is that one of the reasons why we don't get there is that we have this need for this reward, a willingness to forego longer term planning for that immediate reward. So in this case, a good example of this, kind of a common example, very basic example, but you're driving home from work, and rather than you drive by a drive-through, you're hungry, you drive to the drive-through, and rather than actually waiting till you get home, you stop on the way, you pick up something there to eat, as opposed to going home and cooking a meal, something that might even be healthier for you. I'm sure it is, or something that would be more fulfilling, a better meal. Okay, now this is a very common example, something very simple, but it's this idea that we know that if we would take that additional time, not only would we be saving money, but the health aspect is also greater. Yet we choose to do something else. So this is something that is very common. And as I present these, none of us, what makes these so interesting is that we all are shaped in some ways by this type of behavior. So identifying and changing that behavior, it frees up money for us to be able to save and reach longer term goals. So the concept here, delayed reward discounting, really kind of identifying what that is. And then how we curve that is, we'll talk about some strategies to curve that behavior later on, but it's the idea that that immediate reward is more fulfilling than having the longer term approach. We delay the process, we want the gratification, and then that in effect creates an overspending pattern for us. So the second one we'll talk about is the scarcity principle. So, and I'll just have you kind of jump into the slide with me, kind of read along as we go through this idea. But, scarcity, this relationship between supply and demand, or this something out there that becomes limited in supply, okay? So really what we're looking at here when it comes to applying this, think about something that, here the example that I've given you on the slide is a limited time offer, okay? Or, something along the lines of the price itself says that it's short in supply, get it while you can, okay? And then how does that shape behavior? How does that affect your spending pattern? Okay, so when it comes to making a spending decision, you feel more comfortable or more pressure to buy something because you think it could become unavailable soon. So this is a common fallacy. We're all prone, again, to making these kind of choices, but the idea that something is scarce and that I need to do it now, if I prolong, the action, if I don't buy the good, then it's a limited item and I may not get it again. What this does is it oftentimes will lead us to overspending. So, we find this, think back about COVID. I mean, in this case, the economy really placed scarcity on us, whether it was common items, toilet paper, all sorts of weird things that we take for granted. But many items, when they did become limited in supply, we certainly overpaid for them items. And then, but on a more basic level, what often happens is when we see this notion of limited offers or only at this price, how does that change your behavior? Can you forego, again, making a choice to spend or to overspend on items? Maybe you want to buy, you're believing that you're getting a really fantastic deal by making that purchase. So the scarcity principle is really, it happens all the time, but again, placing this into perspective for ourselves to identify maybe the underlying reasons why we might be overspending. Very important that we kind of start to think about these strategies in 2023. Another interesting fallacy that I seen was the sunk cost fallacy. So I'm going to kind of pull this one apart as well. Sunk cost fallacy describes our tendency to follow through on an endeavor if we've already invested time, money, or effort into it, whether or not the current costs outweigh the benefits. So we've already kind of started on something. We don't want to change direction. Okay, so you've started down this road. Should I stop? And oftentimes we don't. Okay. Now let me give you an example on this one. this was something I thought about today, just trying to frame this as an example. So we buy a concert ticket. Concert ticket was $50, and this evening the concert was scheduled. We know it's a pretty nasty night. You're also suffering with a cold. Should you go? Well, you've already gone down the path, but at this point, you do not want to change direction. So what happens is in that outcome, not only you becoming sicker, but just overall, you're not weighing the costs and benefits any longer. You're becoming irrational in the choice. So, and you could put this into any number of different scenarios, whether it's, whether it's concert tickets or any other form of cost that you're thinking about. But the idea is that it changes your thinking where you no longer are able to reasonably weigh the costs and benefits of that action. Okay, so why are you still choosing to go to the concert? Does it really make the best sense to do that? So in this case, just identifying, whether or not you've done something through time, money, or effort, can you really reasonably weigh the costs and benefits at this point? And oftentimes, by choosing to do it anyway, we wind up, whether it's overspending our time or our money or effort, it really shapes the way that we make decisions. So starting on something and then not knowing when to pull back is considered the sunk cost fallacy. Now, anchoring. This is one that we see quite a lot, and this one can be kind of tricky. Basically, let me see if I can explain this to us. So the way that it's often described is it's a bias that causes us to rely too heavily on the first piece of information that we're given about a topic. Okay, so oftentimes it could be a price. So think about something that you've given a price point, that becomes the anchor. So I've given an example here. There's numerous examples, but the example I've shown you here is there's a $100 item. That's the anchor. That's the price that we frame in our minds. Now, at this point, they've marked this item down to $50. And how does that change? How will that shape our behavior? Do we see that as being a savings? The problem oftentimes is we know that the original price, it could be inflated. It could be a market price that they're trying to establish. And instead of us seeing this $50 that we're spending as spending, we see it as a savings. So we believe that $100, wow, that item was once $100. I see it now for $50. Look at the $50 that I'm saving. The problem is, should we be spending the money at all? And for many of us, that can really trigger overspending, on any number of items. So if you're someone who is drawn to sales or discounted items, seeing that initial market price, whether it be $100 or $1,500, the idea that because it's been anchored at that $100 price, that becomes the frame how you view that item. Now seeing it marked down, it triggers the behavior to want to go and purchase that item. You're seeing it not as spending, but as the money that you're saving. Now this could quickly get out of hand, and that can really cause us longer term spending problems, and a failure to meet our larger financial goals. So that's the concept of anchoring. And the last one I'll present to you tonight is what we call the social facilitation fallacy. So let's just kind of get a concept there for a second on what we mean by this term. Social facilitation being that if we're in the presence of others, that somehow being in the presence of others can push us to achieve a better result. Now, there's lots of ways to think about this. This can be a positive, this can be a negative. And it's often applied in coaching, it's applied in consumer behavior. In our case, what we're looking at is, where the presence of being in others leads to a change or a shift in behavior. Okay, so good example of this, I've given a couple examples here. You're within a group, you're with this group, and being in a competitive group of people, you're asked to run faster. You may even improve yourself. Your productivity may be able to go up as well. okay? But we can also be in a situation where the idea of being in others and being in competition with others for certain purchases can lead us to overspending. So an example of this would be an auction. So being around a group of people where the idea that somehow we're vying for a particular item, we have to compete to get that certain item. You know, sales items are often the often the issue here. But even in an auction, whether it's an eBay auction or just thinking about some form of being in competition with others to actually secure that good, does that trigger you being irrational? Are you spending more than you should? Is it something that's necessary at this point in time? So this is a really fascinating concept. I mean, basically what we're talking about here is, you know, where co-action leads to competition and perhaps even overspending. So it's this idea that if you're competing amongst other people, will it shift your behavior into overspending? So you have to kind of put these concepts to practice. You'll have the slides to go back and think about these, but these are all psychological theories. It really gets to the core of what we call, you know, behavioral economics. It really gets us thinking about the decisions that we make, why we make those decisions, how it frames, you know, our spending patterns. And in this case, what we're trying to do is identify those, change the way we think, be able to free up and do more with our money in this coming year. So that's just kind of some groundwork for this evening. Get us all started down this path of thinking about these strategies and what they mean and how we change behavior. You know, when we think about the webinar series through the credit union, really so much of this is about behavior. And what we're hoping to do is if you can make a few shifts in your behavior in this coming year and applying the information that you're getting through the webinar series, you're going to be successful. So how do we actually put this in practice and how do we make those changes? What I'll present to you first is we're going to look at some budgeting strategies. So we've laid out those psychological theories, kind of laid the groundwork, kind of get you thinking about maybe why you do a certain thing, why are you overspending, or how do you approach money? How does it shift your thinking? And the practical tool that we're going to use to kind of curb some of these behaviors to avoid overspending and to shift behaviors to really get us thinking about budgeting. Now, we've done some budgeting work over the last year and a half. Really, you could go back through the webinar series and go back and pull some of those presentations where we present. I think I presented 4 different budgets. This evening, I will not do that. We're only going to present 2 budgets just to get us kind of in the mode again in 2023 thinking about budgeting. But there's a whole series that we've done on budgeting, an entire webinar that lays out 4 different strategies. Tonight I'm going to present 2, but you can always go back through the webinar series from the previous year and review that for further detail. So when we're thinking about a budget, again, we've got this frame now for identifying some of the psychological or behavioral reasons why we might be overspending. A budget and having a budget is where we really take the theoretical to the practical. It's that shift between the two. So here what we're looking at is what we call the 50-30-20 budget. This particular budget, it's nice because it frames, when we think about how are we going to create more savings or control our spending over the next year, you've got to have a focal point. And through this particular budget, it creates the framework that you're going to need to do those things. So let me just pull you into the slide for a moment. So required expenses, you take your overall income, 50% of that should just kind of fall into, these categories that are required expenses. We've listed a number: housing, utilities, groceries, some of your outstanding debts, okay? That should account for about 50% of your overall money. Now, this budget also provides a 20% built-in strategy towards savings. Now, we've got that broadly defined. This could be something that you're looking at over the year as housing. Maybe you're planning to be a first-time home buyer. You want some additional closing costs. We just need some money put into that savings to prepare for those items in the coming year. This could be you adding more money to your retirement, emergency fund, a vacation, a Christmas fund, however you define that, but it builds in 20% into this budget. And then we call this budget, kind of loose big picture because it allows you to have 30% discretionary spending. So this is a great budget for someone who isn't particularly fond of budgeting, is looking to structure their spending, maybe, go down the path of identifying some of the reasons why they're overspending, but they want structure. 30% of your income you can do whatever you want with that money. So there's other budgets that are much more stringent, in the focus, but this is a great way. If you're not someone who's fully committed to the budgeting process at this point, it's a great way to kind of jump in this new year, get started, and really focus on these key areas, 50, 30, 20, and allow you to really hone in on your savings plan and identify your spending, really make gains financially. So the next budget that I'll present to you is the money flow budget. Essentially, this is, I love this particular approach. This is for folks that have certainly matured in the budgeting process. That is, you've been doing this for a little while, and you want to take some steps now to kind of set it and forget it. And that's really what this particular approach is all about. It's automating the process. So in that previous example, again, so very loose structured. The two key areas there is you're meeting your overall expenses and you've got a 20% savings goal built in. This particular budget means, you've done that for a while. How do I set this in a way that I can focus on basically automating the entire process? Okay, so what it does here, your reoccurring expenses, you can set, the dates. All this pulls from your account. You can set up what those percentages should look like for your savings. Everything is automated. Okay, so you've gotten to the point where these items are fairly routine. Your income is fairly stable. You're not having any kind of large disruptions. You're at the point now where you can kind of automate this process. This is great because now your financial plan is kind of set in motion. So, in 2023, you wanted to make certain that you take advantage of that 401k plan that's just kind of, you've never really reached the cap. You want to get as close to that percentage that your employer is offering. You can automate that process. Okay, we've got more payroll deductions coming out. Our savings goal, it's kind of, the number hasn't been as consistent each week or bi-weekly. Now we can automate that process to make certain that that number is more concrete. It's being pulled. It's all automated. So you've got a very clear plan. Okay, and that's what this money flow budget will do. And I will encourage you, if this approach, seems to be appealing and you're not taking advantage of this now, you want to reach out to the credit union. They can also, share some additional details for how you can automate that process through the credit union. And, it's a fantastic tool for being able to reach in an empirical way your financial goals. That is, the dollar amounts, what that goal should be, you set it in motion, paycheck comes in, everything's paid out, you've got you got your goals in place, and now you sit back and watch that plan really come to fruition. That's what you want through this budget. So those are the two budgets that I'm going to encourage you to start on with the presentation tonight. 50, 30, 20, and the money flow for those who may be on the call and are ready to automate that process. But again, the underlying reason for this is that you create more savings, you're managing your debts, and that we have a focused plan in this coming year. Next thing that I'm going to encourage you to do is, and we've talked about this in previous work as well, but really focus on just building, an emergency savings or just building savings. Now, both of those budgets that we laid out, those both have savings built into them. Again, 20% in that 50, 30, 20, that's a goal that's built into that particular budget. So you automatically have that set in motion through that particular budget. The second budget we laid out through whether it's an automated process where it's pulling from that account. Both of them are great for building emergency savings. But again, we've just come through, I don't even like to use the word anymore, but we've just come through a couple of years of really nasty economic stuff with COVID-19. And then we're in an inflationary period, which we all know is really hurting us. So rebuilding this really takes some focus, and both of those budgets will allow you to focus on a savings goal. I like to say that savings goals are a process. That's where we do a couple things. One, we figure out what we can afford to set aside, and we set that plan in motion. Both of the budgets, again, will allow you to do that. Think about what your bottom line is. What can you afford to actually put into an account? The credit union can help you set up a separate savings so that you've got money, your bills are paid out one way, but then we've got an account set aside where everything is going into this account. We can automate that process, but my encouragement to you, as you think about creating an emergency savings or just upping the savings that you have, really, finding some way to expand on the savings goal that you may have now. Speak with the credit union. I mean, the folks at General Electric are going to want to hear from you, and they will talk with you in ways to really get that plan set in motion. So please take advantage through the webinar series. Also, the staff at the credit union that will help you, and certainly Trinity be willing to help you as well. We want to see you successful. But through that process, look for ways to cut expenses with the larger goal, using those budgets that we laid out to cut those expenses and then create a plan for additional savings. Now, there are some, as I said, I've kind of taken a broader view at this. Obviously, you can think about emergency savings fund as what we tend to think about traditionally as emergency savings. You've got money in an account that you can pull from should a hardship arise, but also some ways to think about savings again through your budget. I've listed a couple examples in here, 401ks, which I know there's going to be some work this year, I'm sure, through the webinar series, just looking at retirement and retirement savings. And I know there's been a lot of work on this topic. I encourage you to go back and look at those sessions if you would, spend some time there. Use the budgets here, though, to really take advantage of 401k or other types of employer incentive programs for retirement. Having worked in the debt management area, I've also worked a lot with financial planners, worked with a lot of folks that are doing retirement, work every day. They will tell you that oftentimes the employer match is not fully taken advantage of by many employers. I've been out in sessions where I was surprised the number of people that did not take advantage fully of those benefits. That could be a wonderful goal for you this year. Increase it a point or two if you can do that. If you're investing 2 or 3, how far can you go this year? Take advantage of the benefit that's provided. Build that into your budget so it's a reoccurring savings goal. The budgets that we laid out, again, if you look down into the slide, treat savings as a predictable monthly expense. The more that we can, the more focused and we have that built into our budget, it's there. At some point you stop thinking about these things. It's just built into our financial plan. That's what we want. Otherwise you're looking at some strategies where you can do pull from your paycheck deductions, where we automatically, many of us already have this, but you can do this for a savings goal as well. So you increase your 401k or whatever retirement plan you're working under. And then you also can make certain that through your budget, you can add some additional dollars in there for that larger savings goal, have that done through payroll or through the, just simply through transferring funds into that account that we talked about. So, but the idea is really define that for yourself this year. What is affordable? How much money do you have to work with? Go back, create a budget that's reasonable. Look at your overall expenses. What can you cut? And then build a plan around what's affordable. Set that plan in motion and use the budgeting tool and the resources at the credit union to help you build that goal. So next part of this journey, when we think about building your plan, is really looking at tracking your spending. Now, we've done some work on this as well, but here's what I would encourage you. When we think about tracking spending, again, as we've looked at with those psychological theories, we examine those theories because we want to shift behavior. When you're thinking about tracking your spending, it's not just about tracking a bunch of numbers, okay? Really what we're looking at is, how does the tracking exercise or doing this work, how does it lead to shifts in behavior? Okay, so what we're really trying to do is use tracking to identify areas where we're overspending, or identify ways to curb certain impulses, okay? Whether it be delayed gratification that we talked about, buying too much stuff that we think is on sale, or, there's a whole range. It really ties back to those first few slides we talked about. Tracking will align to some of that psychology that we talked about, some of those ideas we talked about from the very beginning. What can you change? And I would ask you, what is a couple things that you can change? If you can make one or two shifts in behavior, you'll be surprised, at how much that will accumulate into a successful plan. Those modest changes, those incremental changes, that's really what does the work. That's really what makes things tick. So how do we do that? I'm always trying to plug this tool, the money management tool, through the credit union. So I will share that with you tonight. Again, use some of these. There's a tracking tool that's through the money management tool at the credit union. You can always use your online banking tools as well. Go in and look for patterns within your spending, within just your traditional bank account. You can use your mobile app. There's a lot of ways to do this, okay? The idea, though, is it's really going to take about 3-4 weeks of you tracking. You have a dollar amount, you're looking at dates, dollar amounts, and items that you're purchasing. And eventually, you will start to see a pattern within those numbers. It could be things that you do with the kids, it could be entertainment, it could be groceries, it could be all sorts of different things. It's going to be unique to you, and it's going to be unique to your spending patterns, because each of us have ways that we spend money. The idea is that you identify where you can make changes. So to do this and to get the most benefit from doing it, it's going to take you at least 3-4 weeks, so that you can see kind of broadly what you're doing, get a feel for how you're spending money. And then you go back and you pull that process apart. So now we've got, we start to really recognize through that 4 weeks of data that we collected, all the money that we spent. We go back and we say, okay, here are the areas where we can clearly see that we're overspending. And that's where we start to make the changes, in this coming year. That's how we improve our overall, whether it's reducing debts or whether it's just increasing savings. But the idea is that you use this process, shift behavior, and allow yourself to grow in the coming year. So another thing I would say about this is, I've done this with a lot of folks through Trinity. I've personally done it. I'll go back at least every 6 months. I'll kind of go back and review it myself, because I think I'm on a good track, and then I go back and I do it. Bad habits, they just creep back in. So if you've done some tracking in the past and you felt like you made some progress and then you quit doing it, I'm going to encourage you to go back and do it again, because there's always things that just slide back in. Bad behavior just seems to come back. So I encourage you to track your spending, and I'm certain that it will make a difference for you. The other thing that I thought would be kind of fun for us this evening, and I won't spend a lot of time on this tonight though, but you can calculate your personal inflation rate. Now, I've given you an example. So basically what you're going to do is you go back and look at, what was your total that you spent, last year in 2022 in January, and what was that overall, increase, and you get this percentage. Now, certainly we know that inflation on goods and services, it's had an impact where dollar amounts have just gone up. So I would imagine all of us have an increase in our personal inflation rate. But the idea is that it allows us to conceptualize why our money isn't stretching as far as it used to, or how do we motivate ourselves to cut out unnecessary spending. Okay, so part of that will be an inflationary impact. We know that goods, services are more expensive, but if you see some numbers that are really jumping off, where you see that number, like in this particular case, I've just given a basic example. The inflation rate was 19%. So you can see the math and how I've done that here in the example. Pretty basic. Okay, but if you're seeing some really big numbers there, certainly groceries, all sorts of things could play into that. Overall debts could play into that, credit card expenses, whatever it may be. That will hopefully give you, those numbers will hopefully kind of jump off the page and allow you to kind of figure out a strategy, really align the work. The main purpose here is to kind of motivate you to cut expenses. That's really what this is all about. So play around with that, go back and review some of those numbers from last year, see where you're at right now, check your personal inflation rate, and see if there's some ways that we can't curb some unnecessary spending and make some gains. All right, we're going to shift gears now to some debt management strategies. Having laid out all the budgeting work, I'll show you the other side of this work tonight that we're going to focus on for just reducing outstanding debts. This first slide here that I'm going to show you just lays out some strategies when we think about just reducing debts, obviously keeping our debt load manageable. There's a couple percentages here that I've put out. You'll see these percentages for housing and just debt totals, but the idea is that you really use your budget to reduce debts and to kind of monitor where you're at right now. And then again, think about where you want to be in December of 2023. We've laid out the tools. You got an understanding of the psychological impact, how it shifts behavior. You understand how to align that work with a budget. Now we're kind of taking it in a direction, again, into a practical direction where you're saying, what steps do I take to reduce these outstanding debts over the year? In this particular case, loan acceleration. So oftentimes we'll get questions, inflation is really beating me down. What am I supposed to do about that? Well, you can build in, you can make some additional payments to accelerate loan repayment. That's the concept that the more you're paying on that loan, it can kind of, you kind of beat inflation by putting more money into that particular loan, principal payments to reduce the overall balances that you have. And then another strategy that is, something that I'm dealing with every day is looking at credit card debts, but, paying down these credit cards or just paying down outstanding debts through various lines of credit. Acceleration is one approach. The credit cards, oftentimes what we've seen over the last couple of years, folks using that to get through a hard time. Again, just trying to reduce those balances. The more we pay down, the more that we will have towards freeing up those funds for larger financial goals, particularly whether it's retirement or investments, emergency savings, those sorts of things. So debt reduction is how we increase, the savings goals that we have for 2023. So this is something that thought we would spend a little time on tonight, is looking at, just kind of taking a look at some of the debt management options that we have available. Kind of the toolbox, in other words, of how you might manage some of your overall debts. If you're struggling with some debts at this point, maybe through inflation or just the hardship that we've come through in the last couple of years. So I'm going to walk you through some debt management options, explain to you how these work, and then if you have questions towards the end, please let me know, and I'll do my best to answer any of those questions. But first, when we think about debt management options, surprisingly, it's a limited toolbox because, the first one that we've approached already tonight is just you going it alone. You're doing the budgeting work. So that lays out a way to structure your funds, savings, debt reduction. It's all focused within a budget. Okay, so you use the budgeting tool to make financial choices. You put percentages towards the amount, or you put dollar amounts towards what you want to pay, how much you want to pay. You use the budgeting tool to pay down your debts. We're all pretty familiar with that concept, okay? That is essentially you going it alone, using budgeting to solve those larger debt issues. When that doesn't work, then we look at some of the options I'm going to present to you now. One would be credit counseling, which is the work that I do, the work that Trinity does. So there, what we're looking at is the credit counseling process is really about identifying the underlying reasons for why you may have a debt issue. But the key here is that credit counseling agencies are able to reduce interest rates. So if you have a high interest rate, credit counseling organizations can reduce interest rates. So that allows you to pay off larger unsecured debts, credit card debts at a lower interest rate. You pay that off quickly, okay? Usually within 3 to 5 years. So that's the credit counseling process. And again, the key here is that there's a financial education component built into that, but the larger underlying issue that you're using with credit counseling through debt management is really interest rate reduction. And you can only get interest rate reduction through a nonprofit credit counseling organization. Now, there's a range of other things that are out there through advertising, through private firms, all sorts of things that target folks for debt management, whether it's outstanding debts on medical debts, whether it's, I mean, there's credit cards is probably the prime debt management, for charge-offs, something that wasn't repaid and sold to a debt collection agency. We'll have a number of collection companies that work within this area. Collection companies are asking you to make payments, reestablish payments. It's a bad debt. It was sold off or charged off. Usually after about 90 to 120 days, it's sold off as a bad debt. So a number of those collection companies will ask for, repayment. You set up some type of agreement, you pay through that collection agency, and you pay off outstanding debt through that debt management option. I've also listed the debt settlement option. And typically with settlement and how that varies from a collection agency, debt settlement is a percentage of the overall amount that you owe. So in this case, you would settle, not to get overly technical, but for outstanding debts, usually has a statute of limitation of 7 years in the state of Ohio. So it was charged off. You have a statute of limitation for debt collection, which is 7 years. As the clock moves forward in time, the account is worth less money. So a debt settlement company would say, okay, the account was charged off. We're willing to take, 30%, or we're willing to take 50% as opposed to, whatever dollar amount it was that you owed originally. So debt settlement companies are always looking for a way to have either a lump sum or maybe 2 payments to really pay off something, settle the debt for a percentage of what was originally owed. Whereas credit collection agencies are looking to recover the full balance, but they're allowing you to pay that off in smaller increments through time. And what you'll find is, this area is, you've got to be really savvy and understand what these options are all about. Debt settlement, credit counseling, again, understand what each of these organizations do, how they function, and what the benefit is to you. The other way that we would look at this is just using the loan process. So a consolidation loan would, whereas the other examples I've given you are not loans, credit counseling, interest rate reduction, debt settlement, paying a percentage, the collection process where you're setting up payments to pay off a larger outstanding balance. Those are tools. And then for folks that are looking to have a consolidation loan, then you can certainly use a consolidation loan through the credit union. So you look at basically borrowing to pay off a larger dollar amount, okay? So, and the credit union will walk you through various, they've got various ways of doing this. and I'll let the credit union address those various loans, but this is a good way as well, where if things are not in a charge-off status, you can actually, go through the loan consolidation process, pay off those loans, and then really free up the ability to, rather than making all sorts of these random payments to different creditors, you pay it off, and then you would just have one payment that you would make through the credit union, and move yourself forward. So those are some of the debt management strategies that are commonly used. Last resort is always bankruptcy. Okay, so when those tools just don't apply, your credit is a situation where you've had your credit score at this point has gotten lower, so you can't necessarily get a consolidation loan through the credit union. Accounts are charged off. You just don't have money through your budget you just can't do it. You can't pay these debts off. Credit counseling, even if you got the interest rate reduction, you lost a job, or you just can't affordability becomes a factor as well. You just can't make the payments any longer. And bankruptcy is always last resort. And when you're looking at this particular option, we're looking at Chapter 7, Chapter 13 bankruptcy. So both of those approaches, again, I won't go into a lot of detail about that, but these particular approaches allow you to have a fresh start, although there are certainly credit consequences for filing bankruptcy. Okay, so absent bankruptcy and some of those other things, I'm going to kind of walk you through a couple strategies in the time that we have, and then we'll free up for some questions. Want to introduce to you just 3 kind of debt management strategies. Okay, so you're not going to an institution. This again is you doing the work yourself. So a couple of different ways you can do this and tie it back to your budget again, what we call the credit utilization method. So we look at unsecured debts from lowest to highest dollar amounts. Okay, and basically what we're trying to do is we look at we're trying to accelerate our loans in a way that we can pay these accounts down to somewhere around 30%. Okay, the goal here is to reduce all unsecured debts by at least 30%, could be 50%. We're trying, ideally for FICO, we're looking at 30%, but for credit utilization to really work well, rather than just paying one account off in full, and focusing all of our energy, we shave a little off of each one of the outstanding debts that we have. So we use our budget to say, okay, at 2023, at the end of this year, we would like to be we want to reduce our overall, in totality, our overall credit, outstanding balances by at least 50%, or ideally 30%. So we're looking for ways to really shave off the balances to get it to at least 30 or 50%, and then we move it on down to 0. And I've kind of built in some consequences here. How does this work for behavior again, or how does it motivate us? This one right here is really great for credit scoring, and it can be something here. Again, it changes the credit debt ratio, and it helps you gain momentum, just psychologically helps you, because you see the credit score impact. So again, rather than shaving off, focusing, if you have 4 credit cards, rather than focusing entirely on one outstanding debt, you use the credit utilization method to kind of rank order from lowest to highest. You're shaving off some of that amount, shaving around those edges till we start to work it down to 30 or 50% in totality of what we owe. And then, maybe in 2024, we completely pay off. But the idea here is that by doing it in this form, it's motivational, because we see the credit score increase. It should be going up as we're reducing the credit debt ratio, and allows us to have a sense of momentum, which is incredibly important in personal finance. The next one is the interest rate approach. Here we're going to prioritize from the highest to lowest interest rate. Oftentimes folks will say, okay, I don't want to do that method. I want to just focus on the interest rate. There are certainly mathematical reasons for doing this. I will not dispute that. But again, I'm looking at behavior. So one of the things, let me explain this first. By rank ordering, we are always focused on the highest interest rate first. So we're trying to pay off that highest dollar interest rate card, whatever it may be, okay? And then, so what our goal here is to, I've talked about using a debt calculator. You can certainly go about doing that. So you take your monthly amount, whatever that minimum is, kind of use a calculator to say, okay, if I wanted to pay that card off within the next year, 15 months, whatever it may be, you can use a calculator to really quantify that number. So you've got your base number, your monthly minimum payment amount. The calculator will tell you what that payoff would be within 6, 12, whatever months you choose to do that in. Then you can tie that to your budget, and that's what you're paying every single month. That becomes part of that automated process that we talked about. And that's how you would reduce and use the interest rate method. So it's all aligned to kind of figuring out what that would be, targeting the highest dollar card first. Again, consequences, does it motivate? I've seen it where it can be fatiguing and it doesn't show the credit score impact. So this can really burn people out. But I wanted to present that method because it's often used. And for some folks, this is the method that they would want to go. The last one that I will show you is what we call the rollover method. This is one where, again, we go from lowest to highest. We rank order from lowest to highest. We always focus our energy, in this case, on the smallest dollar card. We pay it down as quickly as possible, and we take that monthly minimum payment amount that we have and the additional dollars that we've saved by paying off that lowest dollar card, and then we roll it into our second card's monthly minimum payment. So if you've been paying, $75, $80, $100, whatever it may be, and then you've accelerated loan repayment, so you've paid off that lowest dollar card. Well, if you've got $125 extra, you're going to put that $125 plus the minimum payment towards that second card to roll that forward, roll those dollars forward, and then you're going to focus on paying that card down as well. Consequences, again, motivational, because here what you're seeing is you're seeing your credit score improve by paying off the debt. You see that reduction in debt, shift in the credit debt ratio, and this approach is motivational. Again, everything tonight, we're talking a lot about being, having motivation, shifting behavior. This is a great way to do that. So those are 3 quick methods that you can use. Let me take you to this last slide, and then we'll open it up in the time that we have for questions. Again, encourage you, make a plan. We've given you some information to help form that plan. You've got some of those psychological tools. Go back and review some of those biases that we talked about. Identify, try to correct those. Using those psychological strategies, I think, is incredibly powerful for addressing the underlying reasons which lead us to overspending. So go back and review those. Certainly look at the 2 budgets that we laid out, kind of think about what that is in this coming year. Focus on the numbers. Really, if you're thinking about applying those debt management strategies, whatever method that you choose to go in, credit utilization, rollover, interest rate approach, make a plan to tie that to your budget so that those numbers become real numbers. And you want that to be set in a predictable form. So once you go down that path, try to, stick to those numbers each month so that it has the impact that you want at the end of the year. And then obviously you can always reach out to us, and we encourage you to reach out to us either at Trinity or reach out to the credit union so that we can help you along the way. Last thing I would show you, just in terms of behavior, and then we'll take questions. So I looked at this large research study that was done, and there's been several out there. I looked at Federal Reserve, a bunch of different, as I talked about earlier. I've been looking at this literature, and not only preparing for the presentation tonight, but just diving into some of these strategies, making certain that we're providing through the webinar series effective strategies. Now, they did a meta-analysis where they took lots of different research strategies and looked for patterns within these strategies. But here are some of the things that they found. I'll just highlight a couple. Basically, we've talked a lot about creating a budget, okay, shifting behavior through that process, delayed gratification. That's certainly built into these studies where they've seen that that does have an impact. Anytime that you can put some time between you making a purchase and you spending money, that certainly leads to a shift in behavior. And then just having clear goals, goal alignment, So there's a whole list of things here. These are often talked about in some common literature. Folks reference these points a lot, but the question is, do they work? Is it helping us really accomplish our financial goals? The tools that we're laying out here, they do have some research backing, and just wanted to share those with you. So go back and take a look at some of these common strategies and approaches. We've laid out many of them kind of embedded in the strategies tonight, but I thought it was interesting research, and encourage you to kind of go back and take a look at these as you make changes and shift behavior in the coming year. So that will conclude tonight. That's a lot to get through in this hour. I always try to make certain we have a lot to go on. I appreciate everyone's time on a cold evening here in January, and I'll open it up now for questions.
All right, thanks, Todd. For everyone on tonight's webinar, as Todd mentioned, we'll open it up for Q&A. I know we're coming up on the 7 o'clock hour, so we likely won't get to every question, but if you want to, go ahead and submit a question you might have in the chat. I can definitely share those questions with Todd after and ensure you get that answer. So we'll go ahead and jump in. I know we had a couple that were pre-submitted. The first one says, I just paid off my debt, but I'm marrying into debt. What advice do you have to help tackle his student loans in the best possible way once we're married?
Yeah, tackling student loan debt. Well, student loans, it is quite a specialty. So one of the things I would encourage you to do there, I know that when we're thinking about just handling those student loan debts, certainly if you haven't consolidated your student loans, first thing we want to do is get an understanding of where you're at in the student loan process. Now, I can help you, take a look at that. I'm actually a student loan counselor, so I can help you. In that. I can give you some direction. But first of all, we want to know. I would have to know, where are you in that? What tools are you utilizing through the student loan process right now? That's number one, because there are a number of ways that we can reduce, the overall payment amounts to free up some additional dollars by taking advantage of the resources and programs that are available through, the student loan process. And the second thing is that I would have to know, how much of this money is private money, or how much of this is money you borrow from the federal government, because that really changes the conversation. As you know, there aren't really tools that are available in the private loan market, but I would just encourage you, for a question like this, just reach out to me at Trinity and I can give you direction. I also know a lot of folks that work in the student loan process that are, frankly, even more advanced in their training than I am. But at the end of the day, it's really looking at trying to look at your overall income and then try to take advantage of whatever tools we can through the student loan repayment process. So there's no easy way out of that. Student loans is something that is just difficult to manage in general. But to really dive into that question, it goes beyond what I would be able to do quickly. But I would just encourage you to reach out to me, and let's take another look at that in depth after this call, and I'll try to point you in a good direction and share the resources that I have through Trinity.
All right, and we'll go ahead and fit one more question in. This question says, how much money should I be setting aside for an emergency savings fund? And what should I be using an emergency savings fund for?
Yeah, well, folks, this is a really interesting question, because we always go back to that kind of default answer of 3 to 6 months emergency savings, those sorts of things. I mean, again, it's really trying to establish some dollar amount absent having income, what do I do to forego some type of hardship? How do I get through a difficult time? And in this case, certainly just going through your budget, should a hardship occur, take a look at where you're at right now. I mean, do you have money set aside should something happen? How much do you actually have? So if that dollar amount turns out to be where, in the next coming month or the next 2 months, your credit takes a hit, or you're really in a dire situation, then that tells you that we've got some work to do in that area. At minimum, I would say at least aim to get that savings built up to where you have at least 3 months. Have some hardship dollars in there where something is built up. My encouragement, though, would be use some of the strategies we've laid out in tonight's presentation and really focus on a couple things. One, go through your budget. What can you afford to set aside? Because we can talk numbers all day long, but at the end of the day, we have to be able to say, what can we afford? So go through your budget. Let's look for some ways that we can really lay out, what can you afford to start setting aside, and then automate that process. That's the whole key. You can either do that once you've laid out, what you can afford to set aside after all things are paid and other obligations are met. What, you really want to automate that process, and that can either be done through payroll deduction or work with the credit union, establish a separate account, start transferring those funds in. The better you can automate that process, the more that fund's going to build. So, and then third, if you're putting some money in right now, the question would be how much further can we go? So again, glad to help you along that journey. I know the credit union would be glad to help you as well, but identify, what's affordable. If you're currently doing it, let's try to up that amount, and then let's use the tools that we have through the credit union and the process to set that plan in motion and then stay committed. That's the whole goal here, is to be committed. Going back to that question of behavior again, make the change and stay the course. That's how we arrive at that number. Ideally, if a hardship were to occur, I would say at minimum, let's have enough to get, meet your family's obligations for at least the next 90 days, and then, build from there.
All right, thank you, Todd. That's going to conclude our Q&A session for tonight. Thank you all for joining us, and have a great rest of your evening.